This should work this time. I say confidently, with the confidence of someone that only knows some of what they're doing. Give it a second. Okay, so that's on, and yeah, I hear it. Hopefully anybody else who logs in does hear it, but we've got audio this time. So welcome to Heron 2 Electric Boogaloo, where I get to do this presentation delayed, but that's totally okay. So I don't know if anybody will have the chance to pop on, but either way, this will be here for future viewing. And like I said before in the post, I will be moving it over to YouTube as well. So sorry again for the delay. Thank you guys so much for your patience. And I hope everybody's having a good day. Happy solstice, by the way. So, longest day of the year, which we love. That's always fun. So, hopefully, you guys are taking some good advantage of it and the weather stays nicer. Um, but yeah, definitely a time, right? So good morning. Thank you again for taking the time to pop in. I'm just giving it another second in case anybody wants to pop on at 11:30. Hopefully, you guys are still again having some good birding activity and time, and seeing some good birds in your yard as well. And if not, take the time to go out and see some. Herons are on that list of some that you could see that may not be in your yard, so that is always a delight as well. So good morning. All right, so it's 11:30. We're gonna go ahead and get started. Good morning, guys. Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Jolene. I am a certified songbird feeding specialist with Wild Birds Unlimited of Concord, and that title doesn't really help us today because we're not going to be feeding any herons. We're going to be looking at them and learning a lot about them. So we're going to go for the education coordinator title there. Herons are obviously not my field of expertise, so hopefully this is just kind of a quick glimpse into a lot of their behaviors and stuff like that as well too. So chances are, if you have any questions, I may or may not know the answer. So definitely feel free to drop a comment if you have any questions, and I will definitely double check it or get back to it when I can as well too if I don't know the answer right away. But with that said, we're just gonna hop right into it and make up for some lost time. So, herons in general are in the order Sicaniformes, which includes a lot of our storks, ibises, spoonbills, and actually some vultures. So, those in North America and South America, some of them are in this family as well. Or that order, not family. I always do that. But more specifically, our herons that we're talking about today are in the family Ardeidae, which includes herons, egrets, and bitterns, all of which I'll kind of reference a little bit throughout this presentation as well. Um, for the most part, their habitat is, I want to say, kind of straightforward, surprisingly. They prefer areas that are either coastal or interior wetlands. So some might do better in saltwater or freshwater or do both. You could find them in rivers, ponds, lakes, marshes, retaining ponds as well. Like we have one of those behind the store that we often can see a green heron or a great blue occasionally. So you never know who's going to stop by in those locations. Some of these herons are year-round species. So the great blue heron is actually our primary year-round resident. So you could see him all throughout the state of North Carolina, which is really fun, and throughout a lot of the United States as well too. So this purple in this range map here is where you could find great blue herons throughout the year. You've got this kind of orangish, peachish kind of color up near the top. That's their summer range. They actually push up a little bit farther north into sections of Canada as well. Um, and then the yellow is their migration range, so you might see them occasionally through either like spring or fall. And then this blue range through a lot of Central and a little bit of South America and some of the islands there is their wintering range as well too. So they've got a pretty good large size range, which is really fun. And the great blue heron as well is our largest heron in North America as well. Some of them can be close to 4 foot tall, so they're definitely very large, kind of intimidating when you get a little bit up close there as well. The oldest heron on record was 24 years and 6 months old, again through banding practices of like capturing, banding them around like usually the ankle. It doesn't cause any issues through their day-to-day life, and then releasing and then eventually sometimes recapturing if they're in the same area or wherever they're doing like that banding practice that day. When it comes to ID for these birds, again, they can range from pretty large to a little bit smaller. So usually medium to large wading birds, which means these birds have very long necks. They have very long, kind of stout bills, and then they have very long legs as well too. You'll notice that there's no feathers on their legs because they're usually doing a lot of wading in a lot of water. Their wings as well, they have a very large wingspan and they're also very broad. For the most case, if you ever see them in flight, it's a very kind of slow, powerful, like continuous kind of flight. Oftentimes with hawks or vultures, you might have it where they flap occasionally and then they soar, right? But these guys are pretty consistent in that flight pattern. Not only that, but if you ever see them in flight, you're going to see their very pointed beak. So that is a very obvious shape aspect for them. And then usually their legs are kind of just dangling past them. Their tails are very short and rounded, so their legs are just kind of right there. You will see those immediately. You can look for the beak and the legs, and you'll notice that while they are in flight. As I said, there's three primary groups of birds in this family. You have your herons, egrets, and your bitterns. The best way I can kind of easily describe the differences is your herons seem to be the ones that have like more coloration. So whether that's gray, blue, a little bit of brown, kind of a lot of those colorations, they'll have a mix of those. Egrets are primarily white as well too. So this includes like your gray egret and snowy egret. They have a lot of white coloration. I found a good phrasing where basically said every egret is a heron, but not every heron is an egret, right? So it just basically depends on coloration in that regard. And then bitterns are a little bit different. We don't get them as frequently in the state, but the least bittern can be found occasionally. They look I have a picture of them a little bit later. They're a mix of light browns and dark browns, and they use a lot of that to their advantage in camouflage as well too. One thing actually I wanted to mention before I go on to this. So remember how I showed the range for the Great Blue Herons as well? So it covers a very large portion of North America, right? And oftentimes when that happens, that means we get a lot of that species diversity a little bit. So Great Blue Herons have 9 recognized subspecies, which means in certain locations, the Great Blue Herons will look very different from one another. So there is actually a Great Blue Heron subspecies in Florida that looks a lot like a great egret. It's a lot of that white coloration. So there is some variation there. The main difference between your great blue heron, that kind of white subspecies, is that they usually still have yellowish legs, and they're also still a little bit bigger than those great egrets as well too. So I just wanted to point that out. I thought that was really cool. So something else that's really intriguing about these species is that they have some very intricate kind of feather styles and patterns, right? So one thing that these species do have are powder down feathers. Now, there's actually a lot of different categories of feathers that a bird can have, and not all of them have the same styles. Some that all of them have include like their primary feathers on the very outer parts of their wings, their secondaries, coverts that kind of help cover a lot of the bird. Some can have defined rictal bristles, which are essentially like whiskers, but they're just modified feathers that can be found near the beak. Powder down are kind of like that rictal bristle category where not everybody has them. Some of them do, some of them don't, right? So the cool thing about these powder down feathers is that these continually grow and fray, regardless of what time of year it is, if the bird's molting, if they're not. They're kind of constantly doing that job. And essentially they will kind of preen some of those powder down feathers, which kind of break it down, and they utilize that in their preening process, which helps remove a lot of debris and oils that might build up in their feathers, or helps keep any of that buildup from happening as well too, which is really fun. And along with that preening process, these birds also have a pectinate claw. I do not have a picture of it, which is a real bummer, but I did reference it because last month your whippoorwills and nightjars have the same thing, right? So essentially, basically, on the toes of these herons and egrets, all that kind of stuff, on the middle toe in the front, basically on their claw, there is kind of a comb-like structure, right? And essentially what that does is it allows these birds to kind of preen and scratch at their feathers to help clean up in spaces that their bill might not be able to access, right? So sometimes if you see them kind of gingerly going in with just like one toe, that's essentially what's going on, which is a really cool, it's a fun behavior if you ever get the chance to see it. Not only that, but these birds also do have a very prominent breeding plumage, which is really interesting. So songbirds in general, let's look at goldfinches, for example, have a very good example of breeding plumage versus non-breeding plumage. Breeding plumage is used usually during nesting season, whether it's both your males and your females, or just like your males, depends on the species. But essentially they look a little bit more extravagant during nesting season, and then in the off season they lose a lot of that flair. So goldfinches change from that yellow in the summertime to more of like an olive green in the winter and the early spring, right? So these guys kind of do a similar thing, except instead of like changing colors in most of their feathers, they get more extravagant, kind of wispy like plumes, right? So this can happen along the head, neck, shoulders of certain species, and they actually do still change some color, but not where you think they would. The skin on their bill, legs, and other bare parts that you can see actually does change color. So their bill can change color. The part over by their face and their eyes can actually change from like a yellow to a pink or a slight green or a slight blue depending on the species, which is really fun to see. We don't usually get to see those changes happening directly on the skin. And these birds are honestly really charming. So charming and so pretty that early on, before conservation was in place, a lot of these birds were hunted for their plumes in the late 19th to early 20th century. So oftentimes these plumes, whether they were plucked from the bird or the bird was killed for those plumes, often became used in hat ornaments, gloves, clothing, and handbags. And oftentimes this was very threatening, so we actually almost lost some of these species of herons due to those practices. But due to a lot of pushing just from normal people, we were able to enforce a few different laws, eventually getting the Migratory Bird Treaty Act of 1918, which helped protect these birds, so their populations are pretty good as well too. And there's totally different cases. Some cases did not work out as well. If you've ever heard of the Carolina parakeet, that was a bird that used to be a parakeet that lived in the Carolinas, but was basically hunted to extinction before a lot of those practices came in place. So there are good stories, there are bad stories, but it's good to know how far we've come in just a short amount of time. So this is an example of some of our different herons that we have in the state. In general, we have the great blue heron that we can usually see consistently here. The little blue, the tricolored, and the black crowned and the yellow crowned night heron are often found on the coast, and they can either be a year-round resident or a summer resident, depending on the species. The green heron can also be found in the Piedmont area. They are a summer resident, so you can also find them in some similar habitats where you might find the great blue herons as well too. You'll notice with all of these birds, they have that kind of long, thicker bill. You have those longer legs. And then these birds, the night heron and the green heron do have longer necks, but you don't always see that in use. And they also have those short tails as well too. And these birds also have some examples of breeding plumage, right? So like the black crowned night heron, this plume right here that extends, that's basically like their breeding plumage. That's the main thing that kind of changes for them. Other ones you could see with the tricolored heron, you've got that change in the skin color and a little bit of the plumes on the back. And then with the little blue, you've got some of those smaller plumes coming from the neck as well too. So the great blues have it where they have some on the head, the neck, and on the back as well. So you can kind of see that if you're ever taking a look at them this time of year as well too. We also have different types of egrets, right? So I talked about our gray egret, which can sometimes be found over in the Piedmont area. A lot of these other birds can be more of a coastal resident, and sometimes depends on after nesting season. They might kind of expand to a few different areas before ducking out or changing location for the winter. You've got two different egrets, our snowy egret and our cattle egret. Snowy egrets are smaller than gray egrets, and they also have yellow feet, which I think is very fun. You can see a lot of the wispy feathers on them for their breeding plumage as well. Same with the cattle egret. They've got that kind of tan coloration on the top of the head and on the back as well. That's a good example of where those feathers kind of come in. And then this is an example of the least bittern, which again is not a kind of a rarer bird depending on where you live in North Carolina. You could see a lot of the light brown, dark brown, and the white coloration. These guys can be found in a lot of reeds, essentially, or like cattails, like those kinds of plants, and they blend in really well. So their camouflage is fantastic. And then your males can often have a navy blue kind of cap, and on their back as well too, they have some of that navy blue as well. Now, when it comes to their diet, these birds are really interesting. They're primarily carnivorous, but depending on who you see, they might eat a variety of prey, right? So, because a lot of these birds are more coastal, we think automatically, okay, fish, amphibians, insects, invertebrates all kind of match that list. Great blue herons can sometimes forage in a little bit of a different area, so they might go a little bit more on land sometimes near these wetland areas, and they can take advantage of small mammals and small birds as well too, because again, they are very large. Basically, a lot of the ways that your great blue herons forage is essentially they'll either wade into the water very slowly. So they have a very slow hunting practice, or they'll kind of stand and wait in certain locations to see if they can find anything while they're stationary. They do locate prey by sight. These guys have great binocular vision. Oftentimes, if they see something, you'll see some kind of head bobbing and swaying, which essentially helps improve their vision with any water refraction that might be taking place. And something that's really cool about these birds in general is if you look, they have a lot of vertebra, but on their sixth vertebra, it kind of makes that kink in the neck, right? So it kind of gives them that S shape. So if we look here, you could see it on the snowy egret, and then over here on the little blue heron as well up top, right? And so essentially the way that works is that sixth cervical vertebra essentially it's a little bit different from the others, where it helps kind of create this hinge process, which allows the head to shoot forward really quickly with a lot of force without kind of affecting the rest of the body and allowing them to grab their prey. Usually they can kind of grasp it. Sometimes they pierce it depending on how they hit it, essentially. And one other aspect that's really interesting is so you know how in the human body, right, we have the spine in the back, and then we have our esophagus and our trachea, so where we eat and where we breathe, kind of in the front of the body, right? So that starts out in the front for the herons, but then it actually switches to go around the vertebra, so that in the event that the front of the neck gets damaged, those aspects will not be harmed. So this is an example of a great blue heron eating some of its food. So again, these birds are very large, so they can either have a variety of large or smaller prey. And once they've kind of immobilized it, whether they wait long enough or anything like that, they usually try kind of head first, but they will start to just eat the whole thing in one bite. I say one bite, but you get how it is. So it starts out in the front, and of course the video won't finish all the way, but it'll start to move towards the back and switch its location, and basically it's the path of least resistance there, which is just really interesting anatomically as to how they work. And you get a really good look at that vertebra right here is basically where that's kind of happening there. Right? And these birds also can cast pellets, so similar to birds of prey, vultures, all that kind of stuff, owls. If there's anything that they can't digest, they'll just basically cough it back up into a little, I don't want to say bite-sized pellet because nobody wants to eat that, but a little pellet that has a lot of that debris left over. Now, for herons in general, there's lots of different foraging strategies, which is really cool. If any of you enjoyed memes way back in the day, there were voiceovers that people did over different animals, and there was one that went, they would have their wings forward and go nighttime, daytime, and it was that's a species of heron actually that was doing that behavior, and that's a foraging strategy, right? So a few different strategies I'll talk about, I won't talk about all of them, is that often a lot of them will flush prey, whether that's by wing flicking to kind of create a shadow and startle some prey into moving, foot stirring along the bottom of whatever they're standing on, whether it's raking or kind of paddling and agitating the silt, soil, sand, whatever they're kind of working with to move that prey around, are all different types of tactics. So like here's an example of a tricolored heron, and some of these behaviors can be more active and some can be a little bit slower, right? So these guys, when they forage, they usually have one wing out, just kind of help create some of that shade or potentially startle something into moving. Sometimes this is a great behavior to also identify certain species as well, too, that are foraging this way. And let me see, make sure I got everything right. So that could be really awesome as well, too. And then for these guys, this is an example of a green heron. This is in slower motion, and what you're going to be able to see is that they look really dumb facing forward, but I love that about them. Essentially, it's going to lock into prey, and it's going to jolt forward, and all of that action is only happening in the neck, right? It's not happening throughout the entire body. It's located primarily with that hinge in that sixth cervical vertebra. And I'll play it one more time because I think it's really cool. But again, they focus in. You notice all the movement is in the neck. The rest of the body remains primarily still. And like I said, they go for a variety of sizes of prey items too. So not all of them are going to be this giant, big piece of food. Another strategy that some of these birds will also use is bait fishing. So green herons will sometimes employ that as well, where essentially they put a piece of bait, whether that is something like a smaller piece of food they don't want, a leaf, piece of grass. Basically, they'll put it on there and they will let it sit on the surface of the water to potentially attract anything else to kind of come check it out. And once they see something that they really like, then they'll strike that instead as well too. And we do also have nocturnal species of herons as well. The black-crowned and yellow-crowned night herons are nocturnal species, as their name implies. And great blue herons can actually forage during the day or night as well. Fun anatomy lesson if I get any of this right. In our eyes, with our different photoreceptors, we have two different types of photoreceptors, right? We have our rods and our cones. The cones are good at center vision and color, while the rods are better in low light situations as well as peripheral vision. I think something vaguely along those lines, right? So great blue herons, actually, they have 1/3 of the photoreceptors in their eyes are rods, which give them better visuals at night, so they can forage either at day or night. So don't be surprised if you see one of them walking around in the middle of the night. And then another practice that's really interesting is with cattle egrets. So these guys often can be found in agricultural fields or over in farmland because they will follow behind cattle or other types of beater animals, which essentially, as they're walking around, stir up prey that can be found in that area. So for example, let me see. This is just an example of one of the cattle egrets kind of following around one of those kind of beater animals or some cattle as well too. So they're focusing a lot on smaller insects. And every time this guy moves, they're kind of constantly checking things out. So it's not unsurprising to see a small flock of cattle egrets, if you're in the area for them, following these larger mammals around. So that could be really fun as well too. So in regards to some behavior, especially during as you get closer to like nesting season, which I mean we're in right now, or as they're kind of establishing those territories for nesting season, they have a few different behaviors that they show off as well too. One of which is a circle flight, where the male might kind of circle around a female, getting her to land somewhere and kind of showing off a lot of the feathers that he has in place, just to show off the quality of them and everything as well. There's also a stretch kind of behavior where essentially they kind of lift up their whole head, neck, and body and kind of just show off the plumes that they have too. This is a good example. Hold on. And some of these behaviors can be like super slow. Some of them are a little bit fast. And a lot of the larger birds, they're very gangly. So let me see if it loads. There we go. Almost. It's thinking about it. Let's see. Hold, please. We won't have these technical difficulties take me out yet. All right, there we go. So essentially, you'll have a pair that are kind of just showing off a lot of the plumes, whether or not it's a potential courtship behavior. Of course, it loads now. Or sometimes this may be used as, or it could also be used potentially as an antagonistic thing. So if there's a competitor in their area that they're kind of just trying to be like, hey, look at me, I'm a little bit better than you, so you should just mosey on. That's entirely possible as well. But you could see the plumes on their neck and the back in between the wings as well. That shows those off very nicely. But it's a very slow, kind of dramatic movement. And then I wanted to show off great egrets as well too, just because they have a lot of fancy plumes. Theirs is a little bit different. So they raise those plumes a little bit higher. Sometimes they will call, but oftentimes they just do a giant drop, and it just shows off the condition, show off the neck, all that kind of stuff as well too. So that is a courtship display as well that some of these birds will employ, which is really cool. Again, they're very large, kind of very gangly birds. It's fun to watch them do anything in slow motion. And that's real time, but it looks slow, which is really fun. All right, and another behavior that sometimes they will use is called a snap. Essentially, they'll stretch their head and neck forward, they'll show off their crown and neck feathers, and then they snap their bill shut. Once I remember where I'm at, let me see. Oops. So they'll kind of lift a little bit. They might do a small call, and honestly, if dinosaurs existed today, I feel like they'd probably sound like that. But yep, so they kind of raise and push forward and then do a quick snap right there as well. And then once they do kind of pair off, they'll often do a lot of bill clapping and preening. These guys usually work pretty well together hand in hand with raising their young too. And something that's really interesting about these birds is that they are colony nesters. So oftentimes when they're kind of getting started, the male will arrive first in a territory, pick a nesting site, and then defend that territory. But as other males start to arrive, that territory gets smaller and smaller until it's just the nest site. These nests, when it comes to great blue herons, these birds usually nest higher in trees, over 100 feet off the ground sometimes. They could be in swamps or forests, as long as there's a body of water nearby. And this is just an example of kind of what a potential heronry can look like. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 nests all in the same tree, and you'll have different nests doing different things at certain times as well too, which can be a lot of fun. Heronries can last anywhere from a few years to, I think the longest lasting one was close to 71 years, so it definitely does range. That said, these birds aren't super attached to their specific nest. They may sometimes use somebody else's nest next season and just take materials from their old one, or they might switch to a new location. So the specific nest site isn't a huge worry, but they will use or favor certain trees as well while they're trying to figure out what works best too. So while they are building, it can take anywhere from 3 to 2 weeks to build a nest. It's really fun to see the process. Basically, the male will pick up a stick that he thinks might be good for the nest, brings it over to the female, and she's the one that kind of puts everything in there, but he takes only one stick at a time. And that's great for just kind of developing that pair bond as well too. And they can build up on the same nest. So you can have any that range from 20 inches wide to 4 feet wide. And they have measured some and weighed some that have weighed up to 5 pounds as well, which is pretty impressive, all things considered, for sure. Great blue herons in general can have 1 to 2 broods with 2 to 6 eggs that are often like a pale blue. Incubation can often take almost a little less than a month before these eggs will hatch, and oftentimes the male and the female do take shifts. One thing that is interesting about these species is that they have asynchronous hatching, right? So that means they lay one egg and then they immediately start to incubate. Meanwhile, certain songbirds will usually lay one egg per day, and it isn't until that whole clutch is laid that they start to incubate them as well too. So basically, once they start incubating right away, when these birds hatch, they often is an age difference between the 2 or 3 or however many they have. Let me see. When they do hatch, they're oftentimes altricial, which means they can be blind, naked, defenseless, and require a lot of parental care, or they can be semi-altricial. So they might have a little bit more feathery down, kind of helps them keep a little bit warmer. So it depends on the species. And then again, depending on the species, the nesting can take anywhere from 49 to 81 days. Not surprising that it's a little bit longer. These are very large birds that just might take a little bit more time. Now, the one thing about asynchronous hatching is usually when that happens, you have the oldest, right? And depending on the resources during that season, the adults will focus heavily on their older young, and they will try and feed their younger ones as they can, but depending on resources, they may choose to disregard the youngest, or potentially their young can compete. So siblicide can be very common in a lot of heron species. But if the food options are good, then they can all make it to adulthood just fine, or can all fledge the next nest successfully. I did want to show off this video. It's very quick, but essentially this is an example of a great egret feeding its young as well. So oftentimes when they're feeding, they will kind of digest some of the food before giving it to the young, or just kind of basically hold it before regurgitating it for their young. So basically, they actually aim it pretty well. They kind of get their beak in between their youngs, and then they just drop it right in there. So it's a really quick thing for sure. And there it goes. So yeah, they often look like Muppets or dinosaurs, I think, personally, but they're all still very interesting to kind of watch and observe those behaviors. Here you've got 3 nestlings that are doing quite well, and I believe it goes back to kind of offer a little bit more food to somebody else. Or somebody tries to get their own food. So yeah, it could definitely be a little bit chaotic in these kind of nests as they get like a little bit older, which is fun to say the least. Let me see. Now, something that can happen, whether they are a bittern or otherwise, is essentially when they feel like they're being threatened, a lot of them will start to move and stay stock still and kind of try and blend in with their surroundings. So I wanted to show what that looks like on some bittern species. So Essentially, this bittern thinks it sees a threat, so it's going to elongate its neck and kind of stay stock still. Sometimes it can't tell if somebody's still looking, so it will kind of reset. And this is a male, by the way. You kind of see that nice, good cap. And you'll see how it'll extend and stay really still. So if this was in an area with reeds or a lot of cattails or things like that, it would be very difficult to see these birds. But that behavior can be a common one for anybody that's trying to stay stock still and not get caught. So that depending on the species, sometimes they will kind of go together or they kind of disperse on their own as well. Again, the adults might return back to that same heronry the next year. Totally just depends. Basically, to kind of finish off the presentation as well, I did want to mention where you could potentially look for these birds too. So in the Cabarrus County area, Cottle Creek, Franklin Park, Henry H. Ector II Greenway, Moss Creek Nature Trail, or retaining ponds in the area can all be great sources to kind of check out for these birds. Essentially, if you've got a body of water, it is worth taking a look around because you never know who's going to stop by. If you want to check your local area to figure out where these birds might be located, if you go to ebird.org and you look at these options up at the top right, you can click explore. Hopefully I didn't knock, I realized my face might be in the way there. But you can explore regions here too. So essentially, if I wanted to look up for Cabarrus County, since I know some of us are in there, I know Mecklenburg is right nearby too. It's going to look up that area, and then I can also, so for example, it does pull up some easier ones here. I'm going to look up a green heron since it kind of talks about that there as well too. But usually you can also change species or kind of search for a species name. Or look up Great Blue Heron as well. And you can see that it's got the data for Cabarrus County. You could scroll down here and you could see when they're usually present in this area, and you could see various places that people have found them as well too. So definitely feel free to check that out if you guys have the time or want to learn more about certain birds that might be in your area. But that said, allaboutbirds.org is a great option to check out a lot of these resources or to learn bite-sized information about a lot of these different birds. Macaulay Library is a great online scientific archive that has those photos, videos, and sound audio that you can check out as well too. And Birds of the World is where I got a lot of the more kind of scientific information as well. But feel free to check those things out. Thank you guys so much for joining, and sorry again that it was delayed a little bit. So hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Thanks so much, and I'll see you guys next time.